The sun hung low over the high prairie outside Silver Lining, painting the dust copper in a windless hush that felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Chayton Redhorse rode in from the council meeting at Raven's Nest, his shoulders square beneath the weight of formal regalia, a fringed buckskin shirt darkened by sweat at the collar, a bone breastplate that clicked softly with each movement of his bay marare, and a war bonnet whose eagle feathers caught the dying light like blades which he wore only for council. In town he doted, keeping to buckskin and breastplate. The feathers were reserved for leaders in important gatherings, a mark of respect earned through years of negotiation between his Osioping band and the county seat. The meeting had been long and fruitless, another round of empty promises about water rights and land boundaries, and his jaw ached from clenching his teeth through the lies. He guided his mare past the split rail fence that marked the edge of town, where wild grass gave way to rutted wagon tracks. The air smelled of sage and horses, and somewhere a dog barked once and then fell silent. Chayton's thoughts turned to the winter camp downstream, where Calera had taken 3 elders last month because Bartholomew Ukraine's dam kept the clean water for his cattle herds. The sickness came from drinking tainted runoff, a slow poison that Dr. Walter Finch could treat but not prevent without access to the upper creek. Movement caught his eye. 2 small figures stepped from behind the fence posts, their silhouettes backlit and uncertain. Little girls no more than 5 years old, wearing ragged calico dresses that hung past their knees. Their hair was the color of wheat chaff, pale and tangled, and their cheeks bore the dirt-smudged marks of children who had traveled far without proper care. One girl pointed at him with a trembling finger, her eyes wide. The other covered her mouth with both hands as if witnessing something sacred or terrifying. "Daddy," the bold one said, her voice high and clear in the stillness. The word struck Chayton like a physical blow. He reined in the mare and dismounted in a smooth motion born of decades on horseback, his moccasins landing softly on the hard-packed earth. He knelt slowly, aware that his war bonnet and breastplate might frighten them, and kept his hands open and visible. The girl stared not at his face, but at a beaded pattern on his shirt, a blue crossbar over a red path, worked in tiny seed beads that caught the fading light. Recognition flickered in their expressions, as if they were seeing a familiar mark from stories told in whispers. The bold girl took a half-step forward. The other stayed back, clutching a bundle of folded muslin against her chest. Chayton's heart hammered beneath the bone breastplate. He studied their faces, the shape of their noses, the set of their chins, the freckles scattered across their cheeks like constellations. Features he had last seen 6 years ago on a woman he had loved in secret. A woman the world said he could not love. "Where is your mother?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. The bold one pointed toward the town, toward the dusty main street where lanterns were beginning to glow in windows. "They took her away," she said, "but she told us to find the man with a special pattern." Chayton's hand moved without thought, reaching toward the stitching on his chest. A pattern he had taught Eliza Harrow to stitch when they met in secret by Blackwater Falls. A pattern he had buried in a moccasin pouch a year ago, believing her dead in a stagecoach ambush blamed on his people. "What are your names?" he asked. "Ida," the bold one said. "And that's Mara." Mara clutched the muslin tighter, her blue eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. Chayton exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think through the shock. If these girls were his, if Eliza had been pregnant when they parted, then everything he had believed about the past year was a lie. And if they were here alone and desperate, then someone had taken Eliza from them, someone who wanted her alive for reasons that made his blood run cold. He rose to his feet, scanning the street beyond the fence. Figures moved in the gathering dusk, and he recognized the shape of Poison Pete Murdoch near the livery stable, a bounty hunter with a reputation for violence and a fondness for Crane's gold. Pete's head turned in their direction, and Chayton felt the weight of scrutiny like a rifle sight between his shoulders. "Come with me," he said quietly, holding out his hand. "Quickly now." Ada took his hand without hesitation. Mara followed, still clutching the muslin. Chayton led them into the shadow of the fence, angling his body to shield them from the street. His mind raced through possibilities and dangers, but one truth rose above the rest. Like a beacon, Eliza was alive. And if she was alive, then someone had lied about her death. Someone with the power to fake a massacre and the cruelty to separate a mother from her children. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the prairie exhaled into purple twilight. Chayton knelt again, meeting Ayita's eyes. "I will find her," he said. "I promise you that." Mara finally spoke her voice, barely a whisper. "She said you'd know the way." Chayton touched the stitching on his chest, feeling the raised texture beneath his fingertips. "I know it," he said, "and I'll follow it all the way back to her." 6 years earlier, Chayton had met Eliza Harrow in the most ordinary way. She had mended a tear in his buckskin jacket at her seamstress shop on Silver Linings Main Street. He had been 24, then newly returned from a diplomatic visit to the territorial capital, where he had learned English from missionaries and bureaucrats who wanted someone from the Oathi Shakoving bands to negotiate land treaties. Eliza had been 19, freshly arrived from Ohio with freckles like cinnamon on cream and hands scarred from years of needlework. She had looked at him without the usual fear or disgust, simply measured his shoulders and asked if he wanted reinforced stitching. They had met in secret after that, drawn together by loneliness and a shared sense of not fitting into the rigid boxes the world demanded. Chayton walked between two worlds, Lakota by blood and upbringing, but schooled in English and law by necessity. Eliza had fled an abusive stepfather, carrying nothing but her sewing kit and a determination to survive. Their relationship violated every unspoken rule of frontier society. And in many Western territories, laws explicitly prohibited marriages between whites and Indians. They had hidden their meetings by Blackwater Falls, where cottonwood screened them from prying eyes, and Chayton had taught her a simple stitching pattern as a private symbol, two roads crossing, never meant to merge, but touching at a single point. When Eliza became pregnant, they had planned to petition for a marriage affidavit in Mercury Falls, where a sympathetic judge might overlook the racial boundaries. But before they could leave, Bartholomew Crane's men had intercepted the stagecoach Eliza was meant to take. The official report claimed a band of raiders had killed everyone aboard, scattering the bodies across the ravine. Chayton had found Eliza's torn shawl and a broken locket near the wreckage. He had buried the moccasin pouch with the symbol and retreated into grief, focusing his energy on mediating between his band and the county seat, trying to prevent further bloodshed. Now standing in the twilight with two little girls who shared Eliza's freckles and his own high cheekbones, Chayton understood that the massacre had been a cover story. Crane had taken Eliza alive. But why the cattle lord was ruthless in his pursuit of land and water, but kidnapping a seamstress made no sense unless she had information or skills he needed, or unless she had become a liability by knowing too much. Chayton guided Ada and Mara through the back alleys toward the schoolhouse, a whitewashed building at the edge of town, where Nellie Cartwright taught reading and arithmetic to children whose parents could spare them from farm work. Nellie was a slender woman in her 30s, underpaid and overworked. But she had a fierce loyalty to anyone the town forgot or mistreated. She had treated Chayton with kindness when others muttered threats, and he trusted her now to keep the girls safe while he pieced together what had happened. Nellie met them at the back door, her lamp casting long shadows across the porch. She took one look at the girls and ushered them inside her mouth a tight line. Brakeman brought them in on the afternoon train. She said, quietly, they were listed as wards, bound for Red Mesa, but he heard them whispering your name. Figured you'd want to know. Chayton stepped inside, removing his war bonnet and breastplate to avoid overwhelming the children. The schoolroom smelled of chalk dust and pine sap. Mara finally released her grip on the muslin bundle, unfolding it on a desk. Inside was a tarnished locket on a broken chain, Eliza's locket, the one Chayton had thought lost in the ravine. Beside it lay a scrap of fabric with a stitch symbol in Eliza's neat hand and a crumpled receipt signed by disloyal Dan Kershey. Crane's foreman documenting the transfer of 2 wards conveyed to Red Mesa paid in full. Chayton's hands shook as he picked up the locket. The clasp was bent, but still functional. He opened it and saw the faded tint type inside Eliza at 17. Solemn-faced and hopeful, he closed his eyes, forcing down the surge of rage and relief that threatened to unbalance him. Eliza had been alive all this time. She had borne his children, hidden them from Crane's men, and somehow managed to send them to him with proof of their connection. "Where did Carrie take them?" he asked Nellie. "Don't know for sure," she said. "But 2 months ago, a freight wagon left for Red Canyon Mine. Women were seen in the back covered with tarps. Gideon Pike heard rumors of forced labor sewing and cooking for the miners. Crane owns the mine same as he owns the dam." Chayton turned to Ida, crouching to meet her eyes. "Did you see your mother before you left?" Ida nodded. "She was in a big room with other ladies. They were sewing shirts. A man with yellow teeth said we were going to a school, but Ma gave me the cloth and said to show you." She touched the fabric, her fingers tracing the pattern with the same reverence Eliza had shown. "She said you'd find us." Chayton felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of grief and determination. He looked at Nellie. "Can you keep them safe tonight?" "I can try," Nellie said. "The Crane's men are watching." "Sheriff Tower Tom posted bounty notices this afternoon, claiming you stole orphans from the parish home in Sandbar. Poison Pete's been asking around about you as if summoned by the name Boots thudded on the porch outside." The door rattled, and Pete's growly voice cut through the night. "School mom, open up. I got business with Red Horse." Chayton moved quickly, positioning himself between the girls and the door. He glanced at Nellie and jerked his head toward the back window. "Take them to Gideon Pike's place, South Bridge, past the mill. Tell them I'll come by morning." Nellie gathered the girls without argument, wrapping them in shawls and guiding them toward the rear exit. Mara hesitated, looking back at Chayton with wide, frightened eyes. He gave her a small nod, a silent promise that he would not let harm reach them. Then he turned to face the door as Pete's fist hammered against the wood again. Chayton stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. Pete stood at the bottom of the steps, a revolver loose in his holster and a smirk on his weathered face. He was a wiry man with pale eyes and a scar running from his ear to his jaw, a souvenir from a knife fight in Dodge City. He worked for whoever paid him. And right now, that was Crane. "I heard you got some orphans that don't belong to you," Pete said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "You heard wrong," Chayton replied, keeping his voice level. "I'm just visiting the school teacher." Pete's hand drifted toward his revolver. "Funny thing visiting at night. Sheriff says you're a kidnapper. Says there's a reward for bringing you in." Chayton took a slow step down, his eyes locked on Pete's hand. "You draw that weapon, and the schoolhouse glass will reflect your muzzle flash. Bullet sparks on stone oil lamps inside. You want to explain to the town why you burned down their children's school." Pete hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the lit window where lamplight danced. The threat was real enough. Schoolhouses burned easily, and no one wanted to be known as the man who torched children's education. He lowered his hand, but his smirk widened. "See you at dawn, Red Horse. You and me will settle this proper." Chayton watched him walk away, his silhouette disappearing into the shadows between buildings. He waited until the street was silent, then descended the steps and moved quickly through the alleys, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Crane's men patrolled. His mind worked through the pieces of the puzzle: the fake massacre, the kidnapping, the mine the ward sent to Red Mesa. Crane was trafficking people, selling women and children as cheap labor. And Eliza had been caught in that web for a year, sewing shirts and waiting for a chance to send word to him. Chayton crossed the creek ford near Blackwater Falls, where the water ran shallow and sluggish because of Crane's dam upstream. The falls themselves were reduced to a trickle, their once thunderous roar now a faint whisper. He paused at the edge, remembering the nights he and Eliza had spent here, talking and dreaming of a future that seemed impossible. The symbol had been born in this place, stitched by Eliza's fingers, as he described the Lakota way of seeing roads not as single paths, but as journeys that could run side by side without merging, respecting each other's direction. He reached Gideon Pike's sod house an hour later, his breath coming hard from the pace. The structure was low and sturdy, built into the hillside with a roof of prairie grass and walls of packed earth. A single window glowed with lantern light. Chayton knocked softly, and Gideon opened the door with a shotgun in hand, his weathered face relaxing when he saw who it was. "Nellie brought the girls," Gideon said, stepping aside. "They're with Octavia." Chayton entered the cramped interior where Octavia Pike, Gideon's wife, sat at a rough-hewn table with Aita and Mara. She was pouring goat's milk into tin cups, her movements gentle and efficient. The girls looked up as Chayton approached their faces, pale but less frightened now. He knelt beside the table, meeting their eyes. "You'll be safe here tonight," he said. "Gideon and Octavia are good people." Ada reached out and touched the edge of his buckskin shirt, her fingers brushing the stitching. "Will you find Ma?" "I will," Chayton said. "I promise." Mara finally released the muslin bundle, completely setting it on the table. "She said to give you this too." She pulled a small folded paper from the cloth, its edges yellowed and brittle. Chayton unfolded it carefully and saw Eliza's handwriting, faint but legible. "Chayton, if you read this, I am at the mine. Crane knows about the affidavit. He wants the land records I saw. Don't trust the sheriff. Find Clarissa Doyle. She keeps his books." Chayton read the note twice, committing every word to memory. Clarissa Doyle was Crane's bookkeeper, a sharp-eyed woman who had arrived from St. Louis several years ago and kept the cattle lord's ledgers in perfect order. If Eliza trusted her, there was a reason. He folded the note and slipped it into his pouch, then looked at Gideon. "Crane's dam is killing your crops in my people's camp," he said. "If we don't stop him, the cholera will spread and the homesteads downstream will fail. But first, I need to get Eliza out of that mine." Gideon nodded slowly, his hand tightening on the shotgun. "Count me in. My wheat's already half dead from lack of water. Might as well fight for something that matters." Octavia sat down the milk pitcher, her expression somber. "You should know Crane's wagons have been moving at night between Red Canyon and Gunpowder Gulch. Folks say he's hauling people, not cattle. Women and children sold to ranches and mines where no one asks questions." Chayton felt the pieces clicking into place. Crane wasn't just controlling water. He was controlling people, exploiting the chaos of the frontier to build a labor empire. The fake massacre had been a way to disappear Eliza and anyone else who knew too much. And the twins had been sent away to eliminate loose ends, bound for a school that was likely another labor camp. "I'll ride to the mine at first light," Chayton said. "But I need to get word to Mercury Falls. Let the judge know what's happening. If Crane finds out I'm onto him, he'll move Eliza or worse." Gideon grimaced. "Telegraph office is in town. Sheriff Tom watches it like a hawk." "Then we'll have to be faster than the hawk," Chayton said. Dawn broke cold and pale over Silver Lining, the sky streaked with thin clouds that promised no rain. Chayton returned to town on foot, leaving his mare with Gideon to avoid attention. He wore a simple wool shirt and canvas trousers, his war bonnet and breastplate hidden in Octavia's root cellar. To the casual observer, he looked like any other scout or laborer moving through the early morning streets, but his knife was sharp at his belt, and his mind was sharper still. He met Nellie at the back door of Dr. Walter Finch's office, a two-story clapboard building that smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. Walter was a widower in his 50s, gray-bearded and kinded, who treated anyone who came to him regardless of their ability to pay. He had stitched Chayton's shoulder after a fall from his horse 2 winters ago, and had never asked uncomfortable questions. Now he listened in silence as Chayton explained the situation, and then led him down to the cellar where the twins slept on a makeshift pallet among shelves of tincture jars. "They're bruised here and here," Walter said quietly, pointing to faint marks on Ada's wrists and ankles. "Restraints, probably rope or leather straps. I've written an affidavit documenting the injuries. If you can get it to a judge, it'll carry weight." Chayton took the folded paper, his jaw tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Walter said. "Crane's men are already spreading word that you're a dangerous savage who kidnapped white children. Half the town believes it." "And the other half?" Walter smiled grimly. "The other half knows Crane is a lying snake, but fear makes people quiet." Nellie appeared at the top of the cellar stairs, her face pale. "Chayton Sheriff Tom is at the telegraph office with 2 deputies. Pete's there too. They're watching for you." Chayton climbed the stairs, his mind racing. The telegraph was their only way to reach. Mercury Falls quickly. A letter would take days, and by then Crane could move Eliza or destroy evidence. He looked at Nellie. "Can you send the wire?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll try, but you'll need to distract them." They moved quickly through the back streets, Chayton angling toward the main thoroughfare, while Nellie circled toward the telegraph office from the opposite side. The building was a small wooden structure with a false front and a single window facing the street. Sheriff Tower Tom stood on the porch, a hulking man with a handlebar mustache and a star pinned to his vest. He chewed a matchstick and watched the street with lazy menace. Pete leaned against the hitching rail, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. Chayton walked straight toward them, his shoulders loose and his hands visible. He stopped at the base of the steps, meeting the sheriff's gaze. "Morning, Tom." Tom's eyes narrowed. "Heard you've been busy, Red Horse, stealing orphans now." "Heard you've been busy filing false reports," Chayton replied evenly. "Blaming massacres on my people when it's Crane's men doing the killing." Tom's hand drifted toward his holstered revolver. "That's a dangerous accusation." "It's the truth," Chayton said, "and I'm going to prove it." Pete straightened his knife, disappearing into his pocket. "Big talk from a man with no gun." Chayton smiled without warmth. "Don't need a gun to deal with you, Pete." The tension crackled like static before a lightning strike. Tom stepped forward, his bulk blocking the doorway. "You're not going anywhere near that telegraph." Chayton shifted his weight, his body angled to see both men. "Then I'll just stand here and talk, loud enough for the whole street to hear how Crane faked a stagecoach massacre to kidnap a seamstress. Loud enough for folks to wonder why you're protecting him." Tom's face flushed. "You're under arrest." He lunged down the steps, his hands reaching for Chayton's collar. Chayton sidestepped and grabbed the hitching rail, using it as leverage to swing his weight and unbalance the sheriff. Tom stumbled, cursing, and Pete moved in from the side, his fist aimed at Chayton's ribs. Chayton twisted, taking the blow on his shoulder, and shoved Pete back with enough force to send him sprawling into the dirt. In the chaos, Nellie slipped through the telegraph office door. Chayton kept his focus on Tom and Pete, circling to keep them both in view. His heart pounded, but his movement stayed controlled, deliberate. He didn't want to kill anyone just by nearly enough time to send the wire. Tom drew his revolver, leveling it at Chayton's chest. "Don't move." Chayton froze, his hands rising slowly. Through the window, he saw Nellie at the telegraph key, her fingers moving rapidly. The operator, a nervous man named Jessup, watched her with wide eyes, but didn't intervene. The machine clicked and clattered, sending the message across the wires. "Hold warrants. Evidence coming. Judge review urgent. End Cartwright Silver Lining." Tom cocked the hammer. "Last chance." Nellie emerged from the office, her face calm. Message sent. "Sheriff, to Judge Harland in Mercury Falls. He'll want to see your records on that stagecoach massacre." Tom's gun hand wavered. "You had no right." "I had every right," Nellie said. "This is still a territory with laws, even if you've forgotten." Pete climbed to his feet, brushing dust from his trousers. "Judge won't get here for days. Plenty of time to clean things up." Chayton lowered his hands slowly, his eyes on Tom. "You really want to bet your badge on Crane's word?" Tom holstered his revolver, his face a mask of frustration and calculation. "Get out of here, Red Horse, and take your school arm with you. Next time, I won't be so polite." Chayton turned and walked away, Nellie at his side. They didn't speak until they reached the alley behind the general store, where the walls blocked the line of sight from the street. Nellie leaned against the clappered siding, her breath coming fast. "That was close," she said. "Too close," Chayton agreed. "But we bought time. The judge will ask questions, and Crane will have to answer them. Or he'll disappear the evidence," Nellie said. "You know that." Chayton nodded grimly. "Which is why I'm going to the mine tonight, with or without help." Nellie straightened her jaw set. "You're not going alone. Gideon will come, and so will I." "Nellie, don't argue," she said. "You'll need someone who can read ledgers and recognize forged documents." "That's me." Chayton studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. No heroics." "Speak for yourself," Nellie said, a faint smile touching her lips. That night the moon rose thin and pale, casting just enough light to navigate by, but not enough to betray their movements. Chayton, Nellie, and Gideon met at the creek ford near Blackwater Falls, each carrying supplies wrapped in oilcloth to muffle noise. Gideon had a shotgun and a coil of rope. Nellie carried a satchel with paper pencils and a small pistol Walter had insisted she take. Chayton had his knife a waterskin, and the fabric Mara had given him folded carefully in his pouch as a reminder of what he was fighting for. The creek ran shallow and sluggish, its bed choked with silt. They crossed on foot, the water barely reaching their ankles, and climbed the opposite bank into the scrub brush that lined the base of the hills. Ahead, the dam rose like a dark wall against the sky, its bulk blocking the natural flow of Timber Fork. Lanterns moved along the top patrol guards, two of them walking a slow circuit. "We go around," Chayton whispered through the cattails on the east side. They moved in single file, Chayton leading and Gideon bringing up the rear. The cattails grew thick and high, their dry stalks rustling with every step. Chayton paused every few yards to listen, his senses attuned to the sounds of the night, the distant yip of coyotes, the creak of the dam's timbers, the murmur of water forced through narrow saw gates. Beside him, Nellie's breathing was steady, controlled. She had tied her skirts up to avoid dragging them through the mud, and her movements were careful, deliberate. They were halfway through the cattails when a lantern patrol swept closer, its beam cutting through the reeds like a blade. Chaitin dropped to a crouch, motioning for the others to do the same. The light passed inches above their heads, illuminating the tips of the cattails in a brief golden glow. Chaitin's heart hammered, but he stayed still, his body pressed low against the damp earth. The patrol's light swung back for a second pass. Chaitin reached back and placed a hand on Nellie's shoulder, a silent signal to stay motionless. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the moving lantern. Gideon's breathing grew labored behind them, his age showing in the strain of maintaining the crouched position. The light held for a breathless moment, then moved on the guard, muttering something about raccoons. They waited until the patrol reached the far end of the dam and then continued forward, crawling through the mud and reeds. They reached the edge of the cattails and paused in the shadow of a willow tree, its drooping branches providing cover. "We need to get past the dam to reach the mine trail," Chaitin whispered. "But the patrols are too tight. We'll have to wait for a shift change." "That could be ours," Gideon murmured. "Or we could create a distraction," Nellie said quietly. Chaitin turned his head to look at her, the faint moonlight filtering through the branches, casting her face in silver. "What kind of distraction?" "A small fire," she said. "On the west side, near the lumber pile. Draw the guards away long enough for us to slip through." Gideon frowned. "Too risky." "If it spreads, it won't," Nellie said. "We'll use green wood. More smoke than flame. Just enough to make them investigate." Chaitin considered it, weighing the risks. A fire could alert Crane's men at the mine, but waiting could mean losing their window entirely. He nodded slowly. "I'll set it. You two stay here." "No," Nellie said. "I'll set it. I'm smaller, quieter. You'll need to be ready to move when the guards respond." Chaitin wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in her eyes and knew she was right. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a tin of matches wrapped in waxed paper, handing it to her. "Greenwood only. And don't wait to see if it catches. Light it and run." Nellie took the matches, her fingers brushing his. "I'll be back before you know I'm gone." She slipped out from the willow's shadow and disappeared into the darkness, her silhouette blending with the night. Chaitin and Gideon waited in tense silence, listening to the creak of the dam and the distant murmur of voices. Minutes stretched like hours. Then faintly a thin column of smoke rose on the western side of the dam, pale against the night sky. A shout went up from the patrol. Lanterns swung toward the smoke, and boots thudded across the dam's planks. Chaitin waited until the guards were fully committed and then gestured for Gideon to follow. They moved quickly, staying low, and crossed the open ground at the base of the dam in a crouching run. The trail to the mine began just beyond a narrow path winding up into the hills. Nellie rejoined them at the trailhead, her face flushed and her hands smudged with soot. "They're occupied," she said breathlessly. "Good work," Chaitin said and meant it. They climbed the trail in silence, the terrain growing steeper with each step. The air smelled of sage and dust, and above them the stars burned cold and bright. Chaitin's mind turned to Eliza, imagining her in the mine sewing shirts under lantern light, waiting for a rescue she might not believe would come. He pushed the thought aside and focused on the trail, on the rocks and roots that could trip them in the darkness. After an hour of climbing, they paused to catch their breath at a rocky outcrop. Below, the valley spread out like a quilt of shadows, the creek, a silver thread, winding through the darkness. Gideon leaned heavily on his shotgun, his face drawn with exhaustion. "How much farther?" he asked. "Another mile," Chaitin said. "Maybe less." A sound echoed up from the valley. Hoof beats distant but growing closer. Chaitin's blood went cold. "They're coming." "How many?" Nellie asked. "Too many," Chaitin said. He scanned the terrain, looking for cover. The trail ahead narrowed, winding through a series of boulders and scrub oak. "We can't outrun horses. We'll have to hide and let them pass." They scrambled off the trail and into the rocks, pressing themselves into a shallow depression between two boulders. The hoof beats grew louder, accompanied by voices, 4 or 5 men riding hard. Chayton held his breath as the riders thundered past their lanterns, swinging wildly. He caught a glimpse of Pete Murdoch's scarred face in the lamplight, his expression grim and determined. "They're headed for the mine," Gideon whispered. "Someone warned them." Chayton's jaw clenched. Then we moved fast. They emerged from hiding and continued up the trail at a near-run exhaustion, forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The mine entrance came into view, a dark mouth carved into the red canyon wall timber supports, framing the opening like broken teeth. No sentry stood guard, which meant Pete's men had already gone inside. Chayton drew his knife, the blade gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "Stay behind me. If shooting starts, get to cover and don't come out until I call for you." He moved toward the entrance, his footsteps silent on the loose rock. The tunnel descended into darkness, lit at intervals by kerosene lanterns hanging from iron hooks. The air grew cooler as they went deeper, carrying the scent of earth and damp stone. Voices echoed from below, men shouting, a woman's cry cut short. Chayton's pulse quickened. He rounded a corner and found himself at the edge of a large cavern. Women sat at rough tables, sewing by lamplight, their faces pale and gaunt. Near the back, a group of Crane's men stood in a tight circle, their rifles pointed at a single figure, Clarissa Doyle, the bookkeeper, who clutched a leather-bound ledger to her chest like a shield. "Give it up, Clarissa," Pete said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You can't win this." Clarissa's eyes darted toward the tunnel entrance, and she spotted Chayton. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Chayton saw something flicker in her expression. Fear, yes, but also calculation. She raised her chin and addressed Pete. "You want the ledger? Come and take it." Pete laughed. Brave words for a dead woman. He raised his revolver, and Chayton moved. He stepped into the cavern, his knife held low and ready. "She's not the one who's going to die tonight." Pete spun his gun, swinging toward Chayton. Well, well, the cavalry arrives." Too late as usual. The other men turned their rifles, tracking Chayton's movement. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and too far from cover. But he held his ground, his expression calm. "I'm here for Eliza Harrow. Let her go," and we all walk away. "Eliza." Clarissa's voice was sharp. "She's not here. Crane moved her 3 days ago to the ranch house in Gunpowder Gulch." Chayton's stomach dropped. "You're lying." "I'm not," Clarissa said. She opened the ledger and held it up, showing a page of neat entries. "See for yourself. She's listed here. Transferred GG location high V value asset. Crane knows you're coming, Red Horse. He's been waiting for you." Chayton stared at the ledger, his mind racing. If Eliza wasn't here, then he'd walked into a trap. And if Clarissa was telling the truth, then Crane had anticipated his every move. He looked at Clarissa, searching her face for any sign of deception. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Crane killed my sister," Clarissa said, her voice breaking. 3 years ago, he sold her to a mining operation in Nevada. She died there. I came here to destroy him, but I needed proof. That ledger is my proof and yours." Pete's gun didn't waver. "Touching story, but you're both still dead." He pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening in the confined space. Chayton dove to the side, the bullet sparking off the stone where he'd been standing. Nellie appeared in the tunnel entrance, her pistol raised and fired twice. One of Crane's men cried out and fell. The others scattered, seeking cover behind the tables and crates. Chaos erupted. Women screamed and fled toward the exits. Chayton rolled behind a table and came up in a crouch, his knife useless against guns, but the only weapon he had. Gideon limped into the cavern, his shotgun booming, and two more of Crane's men went down. Pete retreated toward the back tunnel, firing wildly over his shoulder. Clarissa ran toward Chayton, the ledger clutched tight. "There's a side tunnel," she gasped. "It leads to the surface. We can escape." "What about Eliza?" Chayton demanded. "Gunpowder Gulch," Clarissa said. "I swear it. But if we don't leave now, we'll never reach her." Chayton looked at Nellie, who nodded. "We have to go. We're outgunned." He hated it, but she was right. He grabbed Clarissa's arm and pulled her toward the side tunnel. Gideon and Nellie followed, firing covering shots as they retreated. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing them to duck their heads. Behind them, Pete's voice echoed, "You can run, but you can't hide." They emerged into the night air through a collapsed section of the old mine shaft, coughing and gasping. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming. Chayton looked back at the mine entrance and saw smoke beginning to billow out. Someone had set fire to the supports. "They're collapsing the mine," Gideon said, "to destroy the evidence and trap anyone still inside." Nellie added, her face pale. Chayton looked at Clarissa. "You're sure Eliza's at Gunpowder Gulch?" "I'm sure. Clarissa said Crane keeps his most valuable assets there. It's a fortified ranch house. 10 men on guard at all times. You'll never get in alone." "Then I won't go alone," Chayton said. He looked at Gideon and Nellie. "Are you with me?" "To the end," Gideon said. Nellie reloaded her pistol with steady hands. "Let's finish this." They reached Gideon's sod house as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the prairie. Octavia met them at the door, her face lined with worry. "The girls have been asking for you," she said to Chayton. "I told them you'd be back soon." Chayton entered the cramped interior, where Ada and Mara sat at the table eating porridge. They looked up as he approached, their faces brightening. He knelt beside them, suddenly aware of how filthy and exhausted he must look. "Did you find Ma?" Ada asked. "Not yet," Chayton said. "But I know where she is, and I'm going to bring her home." Mara reached out and touched his cheek, her small hand warm. "You promise?" "I promise," Chayton said. He stayed with them for a few minutes, letting their presence ground him. Then he rose and rejoined the others. Clarissa had spread the ledger on the table, its pages filled with meticulous entries documenting Crane's trafficking operation. Names, dates, payments, everything Judge Harland would need to convict Crane and his associates. "This is solid evidence," Nellie said, scanning the pages. "But we need to get it to the judge. If Crane destroys this, we have nothing." "I'll take it," Clarissa said. "I know the roads to Mercury Falls. I can be there by nightfall if I ride hard." Chayton hesitated. "You're trusting us to finish what you started. I'm trusting you to save Eliza." "Clarissa said she doesn't deserve what Crane's done to her." "No one does." She closed the ledger and secured it in her satchel. "There's one more thing you should know. Crane's planning to destroy the dam tomorrow morning. He's going to open the gates just enough to send a payroll raft downstream, then blast the upstream supports with black powder. The explosion will flood everything below your camp, the homesteads, all of it. He wants to cover his tracks and get rid of anyone who might testify against him." Chayton felt a cold fury settle over him. "How do you know this?" "Because I arranged the payroll transfer," Clarissa said. "It's my job, but I didn't know what he was planning until yesterday. That's why I stayed to warn you." Gideon's face darkened. "If he blows that dam, my fields will be underwater, and the Lakota camp will be wiped out." Chayton finished. He looked at Clarissa. "How much time do we have?" "Until dawn," Clarissa said. "The raft is scheduled to leave at first light." Chayton calculated quickly. Gunpowder Gulch was a 2-hour ride from here. The dam was another hour beyond that. If they moved fast, they could reach Eliza, free her, and still make it to the dam in time to stop Crane's plan. But it would be close. "All right," he said. "Clarissa, you ride to Mercury Falls. Tell Judge Harlan everything. Gideon, Nellie, you're with me. We're going to Gunpowder Gulch." "What about the girls?" Octavia asked. "Keep them here," Chayton said. "If we don't come back, you'll come back," Octavia said firmly. "And you'll bring their mother with you." The ride to Gunpowder Gulch was hard and fast, the horses straining under the pace. The sun climbed higher, turning the prairie into a furnace. Chayton led the way, his mind focused on the task ahead. Gunpowder Gulch was aptly named a narrow canyon with steep walls and only one entrance. The ranch house sat at the far end, a two-story structure built from logs and stone with a clear view of the approach. Getting in would be nearly impossible. Getting out alive would be a miracle. They dismounted a mile from the entrance and left the horses tethered in a stand of cottonwoods. Chayton studied the canyon through a gap in the rocks, noting the positions of the guards. Two men stood at the entrance, rifles slung over their shoulders. More would be inside and probably on the roof as well. "We can't fight our way in," Gideon said. "Not with 3 of us against 10 of them." "Then we don't fight," Chayton said. "We sneak." Nellie pointed to the canyon walls. "There's a ledge that runs along the eastern side. If we can reach it, we might be able to climb down behind the house." "That ledge is barely 6 in wide," Gideon said. "One slip, and you're dead." "Then we don't slip," Chayton said. They circled around to the eastern side of the canyon and began the climb. The rock was hot to the touch, baking under the midday sun, and loose stones skittered down with every step. Chayton went first, testing each handhold before putting his weight on it. Behind him, Nellie climbed with surprising agility, her skirts tied up around her waist. Gideon brought up the rear, his face pale with exertion and pain from his injured ankle. They reached the ledge and began inching along it, their backs pressed against the canyon wall. Below the drop was 100 ft or more, straight down to jagged rocks. Chayton focused on breathing, on moving 1 foot at a time, on not looking down. Halfway across, a chunk of rock broke free under his foot, and he swayed outward. Nellie grabbed his arm, her grip like iron, and pulled him back. "Steady," she whispered. "Steady," he echoed. They reached the far side and descended into a narrow ravine that led to the back of the ranch house. A single guard stood at the rear door, smoking a cigarette and looking bored. Chayton circled around, moving through the scrub brush with practiced silence. He came up behind the guard and clamped a hand over the man's mouth, driving his knife into the soft hollow at the base of the skull. The guard went limp, and Chayton lowered him to the ground. He took the guard's rifle and keys, then motioned for Nellie and Gideon to follow. They entered the house through the rear door, finding themselves in a narrow hallway lined with doors. Voices echoed from the front room, men arguing about cards and money. Chayton moved toward the stairs, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor. The second floor was quieter. A single guard sat outside a locked door at the end of the hall, his chair tilted back against the wall and his eyes half closed. Chayton raised the rifle and brought the stock down hard on the guard's head. The man slumped without a sound. Chayton tried the keys on the door, his hands shaking with anticipation. The third key turned, and the lock clicked open. He pushed the door inward and stepped inside. The room was small and sparsely furnished. A cot, a chair, a single window with iron bars. A woman sat on the cot, needle in hand, stitching a shirt. She was thin, her freckled face shadowed with exhaustion, but when she looked up, Chayton saw the same fierce intelligence that had drawn him to her 6 years ago. "Eliza," he breathed. She stared at him, her needle pausing mid-stitch. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the needle fell from her fingers, and she stood swaying slightly. Chayton. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and caught her as her knees buckled. She clung to him, her body shaking, and he felt the sharp edge of her shoulder blades through the thin fabric of her dress. She was malnourished, overworked, but alive. Alive. "The girls," Eliza whispered. "Did they find you?" "They found me," Chayton said, his voice rough. "Ada and Mara, they're safe." Eliza pulled back her eyes, searching his face. "I told them to follow the mark. I wasn't sure they'd understand." "They understood," Chayton said. He reached into his pouch and pulled out the fabric, unfolding it to show her. "They brought this." Eliza's fingers traced the pattern the same way Ada had done. "I made it for them. So they'd know you. So they'd know their father." Chayton's throat tightened. He had spent a year believing her dead, mourning her, trying to bury the grief deep enough that it wouldn't him. Now she stood before him, real and solid, and the weight of that year threatened to crush him. He took her bandaged wrist, gently unwrapping the dirty linen to reveal raw, rope-burned skin. His jaw clenched. "Who did this, Crane's foreman?" "Eliza said he wanted me to sew faster. I refused." Chayton pulled a strip of soft deerskin from the fringe of his shirt and wrapped her wrist carefully, his fingers steady, despite the rage burning in his chest. As he tied the leather, his eyes met hers, and he saw the same stubborn strength that had kept her alive through a year of captivity. "I won't lose you again," he said. "You won't have to," Eliza replied. "We're leaving together." Nellie appeared at the door, her face tense. "We have company." Someone heard the guard fall. Chayton helped Eliza to her feet, steadying her as she found her balance. "Can you run?" "I'll crawl if I have to," she said. They moved quickly down the stairs, but voices were already shouting from the front room. Boots thundered on the floorboards, and men poured into the hallway, blocking the rear exit. Chayton raised the rifle, but he knew they were trapped. Too many men, too little ammunition. Then gunfire erupted from outside, not from the guards, but from a different direction. Through the front window, Chayton saw riders approaching, led by Dr. Walter Finch on his old mare, and followed by a dozen homesteaders armed with shotguns and hunting rifles. They had come to help. The distraction was enough. Chayton shoved Eliza toward the back door and fired the rifle, dropping one of Crane's men. Gideon's shotgun beamed, and another man fell. They burst through the rear door and ran for the ravine bullets, kicking up dust around their feet. Walter and the homesteaders engaged the guards at the front, their gunfire providing cover. Chayton, Eliza, Nellie, and Gideon scrambled up the ravine and back onto the ledge. The climb back was harder. Eliza was weak, and Gideon's ankle was failing, but they pushed forward, driven by desperation and the sound of pursuit behind them. They reached the horses and mounted in a scramble of limbs and curses. Chayton pulled Eliza up behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. They rode hard, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. Behind them, Crane's men gave chase, but Walter's group held them off long enough for Chayton's party to gain distance. As they rode, Eliza leaned her head against Chayton's back, her breath warm through his shirt. "I knew you'd come," she said. "I promised the girls," Chayton replied. "Not just them," Eliza said. "Me? I knew you'd come for me." Chayton didn't answer, but he reached back and squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of everything they couldn't yet say aloud. They reached the dam as the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. The structure loomed before them, a wall of logs and packed earth that held back the full force of Timber Fork Creek. At the top, men moved in the fading light, adjusting the winch that controlled the saw gates. Below, at the base of the dam, Chayton could see crates stacked near the upstream supports, black powder, ready to be detonated. "We're too late," Gideon said, his voice. "The raft's already in position." Chayton scanned the scene, his mind racing. A flat-bottomed raft sat in the water, just upstream of the dam, loaded with crates that presumably contained Crane's payroll. 2 men stood on the raft holding poles to guide it through the gates once they opened. More men were positioned along the dam watching the operation. "We split up," Chayton said. "Gideon, take Nellie and disable those charges. Cut the fuses, scatter the powder, whatever it takes. Eliza and I will jam the gates so they can't open them wide enough to send the raft through." "And if Crane shows up?" Nellie asked. "Then we deal with him," Chayton said. They dismounted and separated. Chayton and Eliza approached the dam from the eastern side, using the same route he'd taken with Nellie the night before. The climb was treacherous in the dim light, and Eliza's weakened state made it even more dangerous. But she climbed with grim determination, her fingers finding purchase in the gaps between timbers. They reached the catwalk at the top of the dam, a narrow platform that ran the length of the structure. The winch was a massive iron contraption, its gears and chains exposed. 2 men stood beside it, preparing to turn the crank that would open the upper gate. Chayton drew his knife and moved silently along the catwalk. He came up behind the first man and drove the blade between his ribs, lowering the body quietly to the planks. The second man turned, his eyes widening, and opened his mouth to shout. Eliza was faster. She grabbed a length of chain from the winch mechanism and swung it, catching the man across the temple. He dropped like a stone. "Nice work," Chayton said. "I've had a lot of time to think about revenge," Eliza replied. They examined the winch, looking for a way to disable it. Eliza pointed to the gear housing. "If we jam something in there, the gears will lock. They won't be able to turn the crank." Chayton pulled the iron pry bar from his belt and wedged it into the housing, forcing it between 2 teeth. The metal groaned, and the gear locked in place. He tested it, pulling on the crank, but it wouldn't budge. "That'll hold," he said. Below, Gideon and Nellie were working on the charges, cutting fuses and prying open crates to scatter the black powder. But they weren't fast enough. A shout went up from the raft. Someone had spotted them. More men emerged from a guard shack near the base of the dam, rifles raised. "We need to get down there," Chayton said. He and Eliza descended quickly, using the ladder on the downstream side of the dam. They reached the bottom, just as gunfire erupted. Gideon took cover behind a stack of lumber, returning fire with his shotgun. Nellie crouched beside the charges, working frantically to cut the remaining fuses. Chayton spotted Pete Murdoch advancing across the catwalk above, his revolver drawn. The bounty hunter moved with purpose, his scarred face twisted in a snarl. "End of the line, Red Horse." Chayton looked up and saw no other option. He grabbed a shard of broken lamp glass from the ground and hurled it at the remaining whale oil lantern hanging from the catwalk. The glass shattered and fire bloomed, spreading across the oil-soaked planks. Thick smoke filled the air, blinding and choking. Pete fired through the smoke, his bullets pinging off the timbers. Chayton pulled Eliza toward the eastern buttress, hiding her behind the massive timber support. He turned back to face Pete, his knife in hand. The bounty hunter descended the ladder, coughing and cursing his revolver, sweeping the area. "Come out, Red Horse," Pete called. "No more running." Chayton emerged from behind the buttress, his hands open. "It's over, Pete. The fuses are cut. Cran's finished." Pete smiled coldly. "Kane's got more fuses and more men. You've just delayed the inevitable." He raised his revolver, aiming at Chayton's chest. Time seemed too slow. Chayton saw Pete's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the hammer begin to fall. Then a small figure darted from the shadows. Ada, who had followed them from Gideon's house, despite being told to stay behind. She grabbed a loose plank and swung it at Pete's knees with all her might. Pete stumbled his shot, going wide. The bullet sparked off the stone, and the revolver flew from his hand, skittering across the platform. Chayton lunged forward, tackling Pete and driving him against the railing. The two men grappled, their bodies locked in a struggle that sent them perilously close to the edge. Pete was stronger, but Chayton was faster. He drove his knee into Pete's stomach, and the bounty hunter doubled over, gasping. Chayton grabbed Pete's collar and slammed his head against the iron railing once, twice, 3 times. Pete went limp, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. "You're done," Chayton said, breathing hard. But Pete wasn't finished. He twisted free and pulled a second revolver from an ankle holster, his movement sluggish but determined. He aimed at Chayton, his hands shaking. "I'm taking you with me." A gunshot rang out and Pete jerked backward. He looked down in surprise at the spreading stain on his chest, then toppled over the railing, falling into the churning water below. Chayton turned and saw Eliza standing behind him, Nellie's pistol in her hand, her expression calm and steady. "He was going to kill you," she said simply. Chayton nodded, too shaken to speak. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling her heart beating against his chest. Around them, the chaos continued. Gideon and Nellie still fighting off Crane's men, the smoke from the burning oil spreading across the dam. Then a new sound cut through the noise, the thunder of hoofbeats. Bartholomew Crane arrived with Sheriff Tower Tom and a half-dozen more men, torches in hand. Crane's face was a mask of rage as he took in the scene. The jammed winch, the scattered powder his men scattered and defeated. He dismounted and strode toward the remaining intact crate of black powder, pulling a fresh fuse from his saddlebag. "You think you've won!" Crane shouted, his voice echoing across the canyon. "I built this dam and I'll tear it down if I have to. No one tells me what to do with my land." "It's not your land," Chayton said, stepping forward. "It's everyone's water." Crane lit the fuse. "Then everyone can drown." The fuse hissed, sparking its way toward the crate. Chayton was too far to reach it in time. He looked at Eliza, saw the same calculation in her eyes, and knew what she was thinking. She was closer. She could make it. "No," he said, but she was already moving. Eliza ripped the laces from her boots and tied them quickly to the burning fuse cord. She tossed the other end to Chayton, and he yanked hard, pulling the fuse free of the crate just as the spark reached the knot. The flame died in the damp leather, and the black powder sat inert. Sheriff Tom raised his rifle, aiming at Eliza. "You're all under arrest." A new voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Lower your weapon, Sheriff." Mercury Falls lay just 12 miles east. Harlan had ridden through the night with 2 federal marshals after Nellie's wire. He was an imposing man in his 60s, white-haired and steelied, with a reputation for fairness that had earned him respect across the territory. He dismounted and walked to the center of the platform, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. "I've reviewed the ledger Miss Doyle provided," Harlan said. "Sheriff Tom, you're suspended pending investigation. Mr. Crane, you're under arrest for trafficking, fraud, and attempted murder." Crane's face purpled. "You can't do this. I own this town." "You own nothing," Harlan said. "Take him." The marshals moved forward, but Crane bolted, vaulting onto his horse and spurring it across the top of the dam. The animal's hooves slipped on the wet logs, and Crane fought to keep control. The horse stumbled, and Crane was thrown, his body slamming into the railing. He hung there for a moment, dangling from a leather strap, his face twisted with fury and fear. Chayton grabbed a coil of rope and threw one end toward Crane. "Take it." Crane looked at him, then at the water churning below. His eyes blazed with hatred. "I'd rather die than owe you anything," he spat. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut the strap. He felt his screams swallowed by the roar of the water. Chayton watched him disappear, feeling no triumph, only a weary relief that it was over. The days following Crane's death were filled with the slow, painful work of rebuilding. Judge Harland established a temporary court in Silver Lining, and Sheriff Tower. Tom was officially removed from office, facing trial for his role in Crane's trafficking operation. Dr. Finch was deputized to oversee the collection of evidence and ensure the safety of witnesses. The dam was dismantled under court order. The timbers pulled down and the supports cleared, allowing Timber Fork to flow freely for the first time in 2 years. Water returned to the parched fields downstream, and Gideon Pike's wheat began to recover the green shoots pushing up through the cracked earth. At the Lakota winter camp, the cholera outbreak subsided as clean water became available again. The elders held a ceremony to honor those who had been lost, and Chayton stood among his people, silent and grateful. Nellie resumed her teaching, and the schoolhouse became a gathering place for the townspeople to discuss the changes sweeping through Silver Lining. The orphan train network was investigated, and several corrupt officials were removed from their posts. Clarissa Doyle's testimony led to the identification and rescue of dozens of women and children who had been trafficked by Crane's network. Reunions took place at Last Hope Depot, tearful and joyful as families were made whole again. Eliza received medical care from Dr. Finch, who treated her injuries with the same gentle competence he showed all his patients. Her wrists healed slowly, the scars a permanent reminder of what she had endured, but her spirit remained unbroken. She returned to her seamstress work, setting up a small shop on Silver Lining's Main Street, where she charged fair prices and refused to be intimidated by anyone. One evening, as the sun set over the prairie, Eliza stitched a tear in Chayton's shirt while he sat on the porch of Gideon's sod house, where the twins were playing in the yard. The girls chased fireflies, their laughter a balm to Chayton's weary soul. Eliza's needle moved with practiced ease, and when she finished, she set the shirt aside and looked at him. "Your shoulder," she said, noticing a fresh cut from his fight with Pete. "Let me see." Chayton pulled off his shirt, and Eliza examined the wound, her fingers gentle as she cleaned it with water and applied a salve Walter had provided. She worked in silence, and Chayton placed his hand over hers, stopping her for a moment. Their eyes met, and in that gaze was everything they couldn't yet say aloud. Gratitude, love, the shared weight of survival. "I'm not going anywhere," Eliza said quietly. "Neither am I," Chayton replied. Weeks later, the hearings concluded with convictions for several of Crane's associates and the formal dissolution of his trafficking network. Gideon, on crutches, but determined, testified alongside other farmers about the water theft and the hardships it had caused. The court awarded damages to the affected homesteads, and plans were made to restore the creek's natural flow, rebuilding the ecosystem Crane had disrupted. Clarissa Doyle received leniency in exchange for her testimony and her role in exposing Crane's operation. She chose to remain in Silver Lining, using her skills to help Dr. Finch organize a medical fund that provided charity treatments to both settlers and Lakota families. The fund became a symbol of the uneasy but growing cooperation between the two communities, a small step toward understanding inner regions scarred by conflict. Nellie Cartwright expanded her school, adding a second room where Lakota children could learn English and settler children could learn Lakota words and customs. The twins attended, thriving in the environment. Nellie created a place where differences were acknowledged but not barriers. Ada excelled at reading, while Mara showed a talent for drawing her sketches of prairie landscapes and family portraits decorating the schoolroom walls. Chaitin remained with his people by the cottonwoods, living in the traditional way, but serving as a bridge between the Othi-Shakoving bands and the county seat. His knowledge of English and law made him invaluable in negotiations, and his reputation for fairness earned him respect on both sides. He wore the symbol Eliza had stitched on a new shirt, a reminder of their connection and the roads they had chosen to walk. Eliza lived in Silver Lining, her shop becoming a gathering place for women who needed more than just mending. And they needed someone to listen to support them, to remind them of their own strength. She visited Chaitin's camp, often spending evenings by the fire, sharing pemmican and stories with the twins. Their bond grew through practical survival. She rewrapped his shoulder after he injured it, repairing a fence. And he taught her to safely load and fire a .36 caliber older cap and ball revolver she'd kept from earlier years for self-defense. They walked the same grass path between town and camp, their shoulders brushing, living side by side in a way that defied the laws, but honored their own truth. One afternoon, Nellie arrived at Chaitin's camp with a packet of documents from Mercury Falls. "These came in the morning post," she said, handing them to Chaitin. "Thought you'd want to see them." Chaitin unfolded the papers, his eyes scanning the contents. They were records from the territorial archives, including the official report on the stagecoach massacre, a report filed by Sheriff Tower Tom that had been exposed as false during the investigation. Among the papers was another document, a marriage intent affidavit notarized a year ago, but intercepted and never filed. It listed Eliza Harrow and Chaitin Redhorse, his Lakota name mangled by the clerk's poor spelling, as petitioners seeking legal recognition of their union. Eliza appeared beside him, reading over his shoulder. "I sent that the day before they took me," she said softly. "I thought it was lost." "It was found," Chaitin said, "and now it's ours." The affidavit wasn't a legal marriage. Interracial unions were still prohibited in many territories, but it was a foundation. Judge Harland had included a note stating that the document could be used to petition for custody of the twins and to prevent future claims by men like Crane. It was practical justice, a small crack in the wall of laws that sought to keep them apart. That evening, as the sun set over the prairie, Chaitin knelt beside the creek where the water now flowed freely, its surface catching the copper and gold of the fading light. Aida and Mara ran to him, their dresses muddy and their faces glowing with health. They traced the stitching on his shirt, with their small fingers following the pattern. "Which road now?" Eliza asked, standing close enough that her shoulder touched his. Chaitin looked at the water, at the way it filled the footprints they had left in the damp earth, erasing and renewing in the same moment. "We make 2 tracks," he said, "side by side." The twins took their hands, one on each side, and together they walked along the creek bank. Behind them, the prairie stretched wide and endless, a land of harsh beauty and second chances. Ahead, the path wound through cottonwoods and wild grass, uncertain but theirs to shape. And for the first time in a year, Chaitin allowed himself to believe that the roads they traced, 2 paths running parallel, close enough to touch, would carry them home,